think my first associations are geographical, and out of that comes the issue of mobility, or the freedom of mobility, which for me seems like the main feature of the European Union, being able to travel freely, study freely, well, in most cases. Also a sense of free trade, which is maybe more relevant to my profession.
So Europe is for us a sort of common territory which we can use according to our needs. But for me, the European Union is simply providing their citizens, as I said, opportunities, instruments, and possibly in different form of support.
Freedom of speech, economical freedom, it's a lot of rights. I think it really affected how we are living today, being the part of European Union. Implement a lot of documents and regulations in order to be a part of European Union members. So I think it really helped our nation.
Is the first thing that comes to mind, that it shares financial and welfare goals, but mostly it's a collection of states that trades with one another and has all sorts of agreements with one another, and it has institutions that work together and that have a hierarchy, and they implement all sorts of projects, and there are funds that finance these things.
Tautų valstybių draugija susibūrusi viena. Ir jinai labai stipri yra, kadangi turi būti, va dabar, kai šitas karas, tai labai suvienijų. Anksčiau jie konfliktavo tarp save Europos Sąjungoje.
For me, the European Union somehow has been an important part of my entire life. Grew up in this multicultural environment, and so I feel myself as an Italian citizen, of course, but I always been also European to some extent.
European Union is a source of funding of many sorts. Since I work in research, it's a source of research funding. Besides that, mobility, representation of human rights that otherwise would be neglected in our country.
It's like solidarity, it's freedom, kind of freedom, free travel, like you don't need visa. If you are in Europe, you can travel to whatever European country you want to travel. Like union, like we're a lot of countries, but we have the same view, the same future, or the same things we want to attach.
For me, opportunities and civic activity and democracy in action. In many ways has always stayed that, the opportunities and the belief that you as a citizen can do a lot of stuff. I see it more as a soft power, like I said, in education, in cultural shifts.
Well, that's changing a little bit, but I think primarily it's always been about economics, about trade, about about work seeking. For me as well, in my day-to-day as a self-employed person, I very clearly see the sort of economic integration when it comes to things like taxation or something. That we see these kind of more progressive ideas of social equality, as well as like combating climate change, that sort of thing, which is coming kind of top down from the European Parliament.
European Union is a community where I live in and where I belong to. I feel part of this community that, of course, is a community of principles, is a community of values that I also share, and being a citizen of this.
Visas aš turiu teisės. Visas, kur aš Mano dabar teisės, ką aš noriu, tą aš galiu, dabar nuo manęs viskas priklauso. Jeigu aš norėsiu daug teisių turėti, tai viskas yra, eik į visokius susiėjimus, eik į senelių visokių, eik sportuok, eik jogą užsiim, ką nori tą daryk.
Live in relative peace, both as a Latvian and as a European citizen. I'm not in any danger as I walk down the street.
Starting from rights to protect the human being, civil rights, citizens' rights, and especially social rights that as European we have probably the highest standard in the world. I would say that the most important are the civil rights. So like for example freedom of thought, of expression, the right of liberty, the right of security, the equality rights. So the principles of non-discrimination, the equality among women and men.
I feel like I am very privileged in that I do have all the basic human rights. When I think about human rights, I think about equality, basically, and yes, about equality in being safe.
Nu, žmogaus teisės, tai kaip ir kiekvienam žmogui laisvė, judėjimas, taip toliau, nesuvaržymai.
The directive to study, I think, the education.
There are basic human rights such as right to life or to health, to safety, and we can't imagine our world without them. However, there are also rights of the social groups, rights of women, the rights of LGBTQ community.
I guess that freedom is a synonym for expressing ourselves, so it's a synonym of expressing our potentials as human beings.
These rights you cannot be and shall not be enslaved, and we should have some rest and so on, at least since we are not anymore bound to the land we were born.
I have right to speak up, I have right to vote, I have right to choose the party I like and be in this party. I have right to be educated, to have medical care in case, free medical care in case of emergency. I have right to feel free.
So I think I have freedom of speech, freedom of expression. I have definitely the right of equality, being treated equally.
I think that today there's a specific need of supporting this. I mean, the human identity and human dignity, which are actually very strong connected in my opinion, should be the basic ground for the European legal tradition to be implemented for the future. And yeah, maybe I would say that together with the right to movement.
I wouldn't exactly say that I don't know my rights because I feel so protected. Bioethics, well, we spoke about bodily autonomy and reproductive rights that I think are should be one of the most fundamental ones, because we are basically bodies, and if our bodies are not protected and free, then a lot of things stop right there.
Some would argue that we are entitled to healthcare and some sort of basic safety. I guess human dignity comes in mind in the context of current times.
All human rights should be treated equally, and they are equally important, because when you try to name the most important rights, it means that other rights are not that important and you can pay less attention to them. So from our NGOs, and from my personal perspective, they are all the same and equally important.
Rather say which is the most fundamental right ever that European context should support today, or today and for the future. And I think that reading what are the most relevant struggles so far at the moment, I would say maybe the right to be to his or her own identity for the people.
I feel like I legally have a right, the right of free speech, the right to a fair trial. I would say safety, free speech, and then the right to own property.
Freedoms that I really want to see respected. The first one is the freedom of speech and the entitlement of expressing even a discordant opinion. Why it matters so much? Because all our progresses, all our social progresses happened thanks to revolutions centuries ago, which started after a very controversial but necessary debate. How can we evolve without that kind of debate, I wonder.
Of course, it's a human rights declaration. Also, there are different declarations and conventions regarding child rights and people with disabilities, and also basic human rights, I mean political, economic.
I think passport. I don't know, it just came in my mind. Like, it's a document you have, you can prove that you are yourself.
Of our constitution that protects some of my rights, like prohibits discrimination based on religious beliefs, age, gender. In practice, not so much, but at least on paper. I have a good sense of how I am protected as an employee, because it has been relevant to my professional life.
It's a milestone in the creation of a Europe that gives and provides equal opportunities to all its European citizens, regardless of their nationality. Thanks to the chart, we know for sure that our legislation, which should abide to the European law, must respect our rights.
Human Rights Charter, I think, is the main one. Our parliamentary documentation, of course, the European Union documentation references that and includes stuff from that as well, but I think that as a main document, of course, the Charter.
And of course, we have our national laws, such as gender equality law, or laws related to domestic violence, prevention of domestic violence.
The EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, that is an annex to the EU treaties, that has the same legally binding it's a legally binding document at the same level of the EU treaties.
If all countries' passports are the same, but the Latvian passport includes this small paragraph that this is a citizen, that the owner of this passport is a citizen of Latvia, and then it lists ways in which the Latvian state will protect you. Everybody gets a passport, but not everyone realizes what getting a passport means. That it means that you are, in a certain sense, under the protection of that country. National law, I suppose, the constitution, and civil law, criminal law, administrative law.
These are all basic freedoms which are actually already acknowledged in the national constitutions of the member states. We should also not forget that the European Charter is a sort of summary of the freedoms which national constitutions already knew some of them even since decades, and some simply try to make a sum of all of them to formalize them at the European level.
Of course, these are extreme situations, and I don't find myself in these situations very often. But that was one time when I began wondering about what that means, that I'm a citizen of this country, and this country will, to some extent, go out of its way to protect me and ensure that I return to that country safely. But I don't think I have ever had my human rights violated outside of being shouted at or threatened on the street.
Manau, mūsų šeima labai nukentėjo, seserys visos buvo, viena išvežta į Rusiją, buvo labai daug nukentėjo, mūsų šeima labai daug nukentėjo. Pažeistos teisės, žiauriai pažeistos. Kai vežė į Rusiją, baisus dalykas, kai gyvulius kokius. 12 metų, mano ir vyras buvo, 10 metų, 14 metų iš Veiverių gimnazijos jį paėmė iš 7 klasės. Ir išvežė 10 metų, te praleido visą savo gražiausią laiką, ten visą jaunystę prarado.
I really rely on Europe for this, for my personal protection and the entitlement of my rights.
Tie laikai sovietiniai būdavo, tai ta išvis čia visur pažeidinėjama, viskas būdavo, tai gal mes to amžiaus žmonės susitaikė su tuo, nesureikšmindavom nieko.
I don't think there are a lot of ways that I'm discriminated against in my everyday life, at least not in a sense that my human rights would be in danger. I see that there are some liberties and rights that I take for granted, and I see them as default setting, and I think that's why it shocks me every time when they are a topic of conversation again.
Usually notice some stereotypes or discrimination regarding gender. So it's when we were doing renovation in our apartment, some people came to look at it and to decide what to do with some pipes, and they weren't talking to me because I'm a girl, and they were just talking to my boyfriend because he's a man and assumably he knows about pipes better than me, even though they don't know anything about our background. So that's one example of stereotype, and also I think you can see it in your daily life, how you react, or if you are really concentrated on your career. It's for a girl, it's a negative thing, and while for a boy it's a positive thing, and they should do that. But so it was some comments or situations where I could hear some things related to stereotypes and gender inequality.
I'm not from any sort of minority group, so there are these invisible rights that I have. Nothing like particularly dramatic in any of these two directions immediately comes to mind, I think. So my rights are protected, usually, or like respected.
I'm happy for being a woman in Europe country, and also in Lithuania, because when you see, I see Arab countries where women rights are very, very different, like in Lithuania. So I think it's very good.
In Europe, in European Union, we have the highest standards of legislation protecting the human rights. So in Italy, I feel that I mostly protected in this case. For my experience, I feel protected, but there are some new issues that are coming with this new problem, with these new challenges, I would say.
Well, I guess I have not had many moments where I feel like I have to fight for my rights. So the feeling of endangerment has mostly come through my civic or political activism, which I have done here in Latvia, which is all, well, not all, but mostly had to do with reproductive rights, bodily autonomy, feminism, gender equality.
I'm not very concerned with that somebody might have a copy of my passport, or that somebody might know my personal identity number, or things like that, or that I remain to some extent anonymous. I'm not concerned with any of that. I'm concerned with how my data is used to make profit, and whether or not that gives certain companies an unfair advantage.
On one hand, it feels good to be able to participate in protests and any political activism, because you meet people who think the same, who hold the same values, and you feel less alone. And also the fact that you can go to a protest and express your opinions and have some voice is empowering. But on the other hand, the fact that I have to do it because my country is lacking in these rights and values, and also the fact that all of these protests have had a very noticeable and strong opposition from the general public, which has been a bit aggressive and a bit ugly, has made me unsafe, and like my rights aren't taken seriously, or the rights that I feel that I should have aren't taken seriously.
I think that the human rights protection in European Union is good, and I think that helps for it to be good in Latvia. In that sense, I like it and I appreciate it. I think that for my expectations, I kind of don't see what more European Union could do. The fact that we have been educated in a more open, more equal way has in these 15 more years led to the fact that we might have a partnership law that goes through this parliament and actually becomes a law. Because I don't think it was possible before that, and that's the soft power I'm talking about. This,
of course, as from the legislative point of view, we have the highest, as I said, we have the highest standard of protection related to human rights. The enactment of these rights, we also have some problems especially in countries that have a recent history as a European Union members, when we can see how these human rights are not always respected as the standard that we expect.
Gender equality or equality of other demographic characteristics, I feel like is part of the European Union, but the implementation of it varies, of course, as with any law.
Put a lot of attention of this point. For example, I think that a country like Turkey, for example, they want to join in the European Union, but they can't because of they don't respect, for example, the woman. They have a lack of in this field. For this reason, they can get in the European Union. The situation in general is very good. It's not a problem.
The point is that we have free health it's very good because in America you have to pay a lot of taxes about your health. It's a lot of good things to be in Europe countries because we have opportunity for better life.
I feel safe enough. I feel this feeling that if something happens, I can go back to my country, I can call my country.
We have some freedoms which are very well supported in the European Union. Other freedoms, other rights, which could maybe deserve much more attention from the European institutions. I'm thinking of migrations, for instance. I do think that the European Union could provide, in the last years and previous years, a better, a stronger support to the member states and to the human beings involved in migration phenomenon.
The numbers are very huge and frightening. However, we do not have enough regulations to prevent the violence, and even our criminal penal system isn't enough for the victims to be safe and for the perpetrators to receive an accurate, sanctions.
I feel as if European Union citizens might be the most well protected and have the clearest goals towards which they try to work to.
Padeda, stengiasi vyriausybė, kiek gali savo ribose, tai tiek padeda. Jie irgi ne visagaliai. Čia viskas vaikeli ne nuo vyriausybės, nuo pačių žmonių priklauso nuo jų protų. Kitas sugeba susikurti savo verslą, nenori, reiškia, jis susikuria savo verslą ir jisai gyvena. Vyriausybė, kad tik netrukdytų jam. O kito protas neveikia taip, kad kaip galima susikurti tą verslą. Jau jis gyvena prasčiau toks žmogus. Supranti, jau jis paskiau reikalauja visokių teisių, jau jam viskas negerai būna.
But we are enjoying a multi-layered protection. The European Union is just one of these layers. Our nations are another layer one below. And above the European Union, there are even other supranational courts.
European Union helped to achieve some of the very basic human rights in Lithuania and their protection. However, such rights as such issues as domestic violence or violation of human rights of some social groups is still a very huge problem, and being a member of European Union doesn't really have any impact to that. And also not every country of European Union is very good with human rights, and EU also has a lot of place and space to improve with human rights.
It looks to me like the trajectory is positive. So I guess it would be accurate to say that as someone who lives in Latvia, it looks like the tendency is kind of positive. I think in most countries, probably it's accurate to say that the tendency has nonetheless been more or less positive in minority protection rights.
The base level of how human rights are protected in Europe is probably set. It's probably in a good level. You can't murder anyone on the street. You can't hold them as slaves and so on.
Now we are trying to change our legal system regarding reconciliation in domestic violence cases. Reconciliation is the process where you can be relieved from the sanctions in the criminal process if you reconcile with the victim, and there are a lot of cases where the perpetrator doesn't receive any sanctions because he reconciled with the victim. However, the law itself it has some major, issues which do not provide adequate protection for the victims.
Maybe the lack of protection and support that European Union could provide has provided so far.
I guess whenever I feel down about things that don't go as well in my home country, I always remember at least I'm in the European Union. I know it's a hard task to make things happen, to make good things happen, but I think that the communication side and the bureaucratic side could definitely be better.
If we compare our situation with those of other countries such as Russia or China, we should be very happy of this protection that we are benefiting from.
The last crisis, the pandemic crisis, the economic crisis, and now the Ukrainian crisis show that there's a strong need for a common leading activities at European level that member states alone are not able to face such crises on just one single national perspective. So I'm expecting the European institutions to become more relevant in the future.
Dabar žiūrint jau iš dabartinės perspektyvos į tai, kas įvyko, tai manau, kad valstybės labai atsakingai elgėsi, tik mane glumino vienas dalykas, kai buvo kalbama apie tai, kad galbūt bus privalomi skiepai, tai aš labai dažnai susimastydavau apie tai, ar tai nežeidžia ne būtent mano, bet aplamai žmogaus teisių, prarandant pasirinkimą. Ar tau reikia skiepytis, ar tau nereikia skiepytis, ar tu nori to, ar tu nenori to, bet žiūrint iš dabartinės perspektyvos, kai jau žinom, kad tas virusas nėra toks mirtinas, kad reikėtų imtis tokių net drastiškų priemonių, aišku, atrodo kitaip, bet tuo metu aš ne vieną kartą esu pagalvojus, kad ar tai nesikerta su žmogaus teisėm. Bet tarkim, kaukių dėvėjimas, plotų ribojimas, parduotuvėse galimybių pasas, aš skaitau, kad tai nebuvo žmogaus teisių pažeidimai. Aš skaitau, kad kiekvienas žmogus sąmoningai turėjo pasirinkti, kaip jam elgtis, galėjo pasirinkti, o tokie reikalavimai buvo įvesti dėl to, kad kuo greičiau visą tai būtų pažabota.
I know that some countries made vaccination mandatory. I myself had no problem with the having to be vaccinated, having to get a vaccine itself. The fact that it was mandatory in some countries, I was confused, and I think it is sort of a bioethics question of do I have complete autonomy over my body? But on the other hand, it was a matter of life and death in many countries, so that is a thing that it has to be balanced out somehow.
Čia tik nori padėti žmonėm, nori padėti, ne visi vienodai supranta tą padėjimą. Vieni sako, kad teisę pažeidžia, o kiti patenkinti, kad taip rūpinasi valstybė savo žmonėm.
I think there's always a question between the right of individual and the rights of the society, and the rights of the society always come first, because there's a society and there's one individual, and when there's such threat as a pandemic to all of the society, you just cannot let one individual to feel free, because it can cause a lot more damage to other people as well, to their health and to their lives even. It's a huge threat. So I think in such cases it's very understandable, and it's a necessary tool to try to fight with the pandemic. And I don't see it as a human rights violation because there's different consequences if you restrict some rights, and what is the outcome. So in Corona time, you had to do that, because if the countries which didn't do that, they had more.
In such a way, it creates a challenge for Europe, even for European Union, for our standards of rights protection. We have to relate in such a way individual rights with the rights of being part of a community. These two aspects were difficult to relate to one another.
I think it's a little bit too much, but I don't want to explain my attitude about COVID. But also I think it's a good thing, because if we don't have this restricts, I think it's not very healthy for our country and other country when they were traveling, and also it's not very safe. And we have all the responsibilities. It's good for protect and save people, but also this restricts. I think it's a little bit too much.
I know that from a legal point of view, it was not very easy, and it's still not easy to find the proper balance between this so different contexts. And I know that not only in Italy, there were different reactions from the public opinion about that. For me, as a person, I always thought that we were facing a very extraordinary emergency in the first moment of the pandemic. Nobody knew anything about that in the first place.
I know why everything was closed, but I don't know. At the same time, I was thinking, well, we can maybe just let's not close the fitness clubs, but let's make it, just open them, and let's maybe find the solutions to make it more safe for people to train there.
Our individual rights in such a way have to be restricted in order to prevent the virus to be spread it around.
I have had no difficulties shrinking my own freedoms for the sake of other people's safety. I think that's a reasonable step to make during a global health crisis. I have been sad to see a big portion of our society having problems with that, valuing their either real or actually only perceived freedoms as higher to the safety and health of others. And I'm not sure that we have learned a good lesson here during these 2 years. I'm afraid that it's just gonna keep being a problem. The fact that you have to curtail your personal freedoms a tiny little bit just so that other people wouldn't die.
I'm not sure how to evaluate a legal document that seems to make a lot of sense in times of peace, but when a crisis occurs and then suddenly you are forced to isolate, you are forced to take a vaccine, and you are required by law not to work.
We need a stronger protection, and that kind of protection can just come from a supranational institution such as the European Union.
Laisvai vaikeliai jaučiuosi jau dabar. Tai svarbiausia, kad laisvė būtų visas gyvenimas jauniems žmonėms, kuriems dar viskas eina į priekį.
Well, yes, as I said, I had the opportunity to travel and to work in the European Union dimension. I have the opportunity to spend time in Brussels close to the European institutions, even if I was not part of them. I spend my time with my experience in the master also be related to the European Union dimension. I think that you can take for granted, but you have to always be focused. You have always to be focused and not take for granted what you have already got.
I'm sure that each individual country's government plays a significant role in how these goals and directives and rights and documents trickle down to the citizen, but in my experience, you have to decide that you are interested in it yourself. It will not come to you, really. Well, it rarely will come to you. Or if it will feel like something a bit alien.
But yeah, these are kind of invisible rights, I think, that I don't consider. Because again, I have like a very cushy life, you know, where something like something like the freedom to unionize or the freedom to receive medical attention, these sort of things, you know, they're kind of non-issues in my life right now, or they have been thus far.
Women's rights are my rights, so it personally affects me. All the situations which are related to violation of women's rights. So, of course, domestic violence cases, discrimination in the workplace, glass ceiling, and also victim blaming, which is very popular in our society and social media, and so I personally would say women's rights.
Taip, ne veltui minėjau, nes tai yra mano gyvenimo esmė. Turint šitą teisę ir ją pasinaudoti, kadangi esu diabetikė ir valstybė užtikrina man diabeto vaistus, tai yra kompensuoja insuliną, kompensuoja kitus vaistus šios ligos gydymui, o tai yra labai dideli pinigai. Be to turiu neįgalumo grupę, kurią taip pat, nors esu dar darbingo amžiaus, bet aš jau gaunu neįgalumo grupę, kur valstybė man ją moka, ir jeigu ne šitie veiksniai, tai aš jau turbūt seniai nebegalėčiau ir egzistuoti, nes tiek pinigų, elementariai pasakysiu, užsidirbti negali, kad galėtum naudoti insuliną, kad galėtum naudoti kitus vaistus ir dar pragyventi, o būtent šitą teisę žmogaus į sveikatos apsaugą būt ir užtikrina tavo egzistavimą, tavo gyvenimą ir tavo visą sveikatos priežiūrą.
You just can see it, and when you look, you can see everything. Like children are going to school, they're having their right to be educated. Some people are going to hospitals, so they're having their medical care.
Gaunam dabar vaistus nemokamai nuo 80 metų. Nuo kraujospūdžio ir reiškia nuo širdies šitie vaistai yra nemokami. Nuveidi į vaistinę ir pasiimi biletą, Zafistarą, už kurį nereikia mokėti nei vieną centą.
I feel like I do have the opportunity to get all the medical treatment I need.
The right to travel, to move, to speak freely, that it's hard to imagine my world without it. And of course there are a lot of countries where people cannot do that, and that is awful. I cannot imagine my world without it. I also forget how lucky I am to have such rights as freedom of movement and speech and work and voting.
Europe is a pretty inclusive region because for some reason I think it is European to be inclusive. That is a very primary value, I think, of Europe, to be inclusive.
I think European Union has a really good and strong background in protecting human rights, and it's very advanced in comparison to other countries.
Compared with the rest of the world, with most of the rest of the world. So I never see myself being in danger. I never see my rights being in danger in the European Union, actually, no.
We are talking about human rights, and we're talking about that there's a lot of problems with this and this and that. And I think that if we as a society, if we would be more caring and loving, and if we just didn't think about ourselves but also about other people, then we wouldn't think about this question, about this human rights so much. There wouldn't be this question wouldn't be so actual, so topical.